Hello, and welcome to today's Green Streets, Green Jobs, Green Towns, also known as G3 Academy website, entitled Low Impact Development, Green Infrastructure Design Competitions, a tool for encouraging innovation. This webcast is sponsored by the EPA's Mid-Atlantic Region's Water Protection Division and is the second in our G3 Academy series. My name is Susan McDowell, and I'm with the Office of State and Watershed Partnerships within the Water Protection Division, and I will be moderating the webcast. Thank you all for joining us today, and I mean all because we have participants from across the country. We'll start by going over a few housekeeping items. First, I would like to briefly summarize some of the features of today's webcast. If you have any technical difficulties, you can request assistance by entering your technical issue into the box at the bottom of your screen and clicking the Ask button. Responses to technical questions will appear at the bottom of your screen below the box. If you would like to see closed captioning, just click on the closed captioning button on the top of your screen. We encourage you to submit questions to our speakers during this webcast. To ask a question, simply type it in the box located at the bottom of your screen. Then click the Ask button. Given the large number of participants today, I encourage you to submit your questions early. This webcast is intended to showcase low-impact development, LID, and green infrastructure practices. These practices have been proven to improve the sustainability of development and provide dramatic benefits in water quality, natural habitat expansion and recovery, and stormwater runoff reduction, while increasing the quality of life and livability of communities. These practices have often been wrongly characterized by the traditional development community as costly with limited effectiveness. To advance the use of these highly effective practices and provide a hands-on understanding of their true capabilities, cost, and performance, the Houston Land and Water Sustainability Forum utilized a unique and effective approach, a low-impact development design competition. Mr. Robert Adair, founder of the Houston Land and Water Sustainability Forum, will describe why and how a competition can be a unique, powerful tool to drive widespread adoption of LID. He will use the 2009-2010 competition to illustrate key elements for ensuring a successful event. Robert will also highlight strategies to capitalize on momentum created by the competition. Mr. Ross Gordon will provide the perspective of a winning competitor in the Houston competition and a similar competition held in Austin, Texas. He will share his efforts to replicate the benefits of this competition in other locations. Mr. Seth Brown will describe the Water Environment Federation's, WEF, their role and commitment in assisting other communities' use of this tool, and introduce WEF's upcoming three-part webinar series on the nuts and bolts of a successful design competition using the Houston model. Today's webcast is targeted to professionals interested in pursuing green streets, urban green infrastructure, and green jobs as part of an integrated community or watershed plan. It is now my pleasure to welcome and introduce today's three expert speakers. Robert Adair is the president and co-founder of Texas-based Construction Eco Services, and he led the formation of the Houston Land and Water Sustainability Forum in 2007. He has since served as its steering committee chair. The Houston Forum is actively driving the adoption and implementation of LID practices in the Houston area, and Robert achieved national recognition from the EPA and others for its unique, market-driven approach. The Houston Forum received the Texas branch of the American Society of Landscape Architects Environmental Stewardship Award in 2011, and Mr. Adair received the Houston Citizens Environmental Coalition Synergy Award for Sustainability in 2010 for his work in developing this collaborative effort. Mr. Seth Brown, Stormwater Program and Policy Manager with the Water Environment Federation. He has over 12 years of experience in the private sector, focusing on stormwater management analysis and design, modeling, stream assessment, and restoration. He is a certified professional engineer in Maryland. He has an MS in Civil and Environmental Engineering from the University of Maryland College Park and is pursuing a PhD in Civil and Environmental and Infrastructure Engineering at George Mason University. He's very busy. Ross Garden, Project Manager of AECOM, directs the company's stormwater and water resources practices in the Southeast Pennsylvania region. He specializes in urban stormwater management, municipal infrastructure design, green infrastructure, and low-impact development. An innovator in sustainable stormwater management, Mr. Gordon has won multiple LID design competitions. He was recently awarded the Eminent Conceptor Award for the most outstanding project in the state from the Texas Council of Engineering Companies for his Independence Parkway Green Roadway Design Project. Mr. Gordon is a certified professional engineer in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Texas. One final housekeeping note before we get started with our speakers. We will try to answer as many questions as possible throughout this webcast. However, due to the high number of participants, not all questions will be answered. We have posted the speakers' contact information in case you would like to directly contact them after the webcast. You can find the speakers' contact information as well as a resource list located on the Downloads tab of your console. You will need Adobe Acrobat Reader to review the resource list document. I will now turn it over to Robert, Seth, and Ross, who will begin today's webcast.
Okay. Oops, actually, I didn't realize you'd already moved it forward for me there, Sue. Thanks, Sue. I appreciate your introduction. Thank you all the listeners for being there, and thanks also to the EPA for asking us to be here. As Sue indicated, we're going to try to give you a look at a tool that was very effective here in Houston, and hopefully give you some insight into how you might use that tool for your own community. Anyone who has been an early adopter or early believer in low-impact development, green infrastructure, I think shares some similar experiences. There are a lot of barriers. We're essentially talking about countering a 2,000-year-old design model, and that's not typically easily done. We have the initial reaction typically in most communities is the same one we had in Houston, and that is it won't work here because our rainstorms are too intense, too frequent. Our soils are too clayey, and it is not just not an environment where low-impact development will work. That, by the way, I think everyone would agree is the first reaction, regardless of what the rainfall intensity or number of rain events you have or what your soils are. It is, I think, a knee-jerk reaction to change, and it's understandable, but we have to find ways to begin to move around. So I want to, before we really get started into this, I thought maybe we should allow you to attach names to voices. I am Robert Adair, and if you guys would jump in and introduce yourselves and let folks hear what you sound like, it would be helpful.
Thanks, Bob. This is Ross Gordon.
And this is Seth Brown.
Okay, so off we go. So I think Sue has already articulated these goals. Basically, we want to share with you how the competition worked in Houston. We're going to try and give you some insight into some of the strategies, both intentional, frankly, and ones that we just stumbled into along the way to ensure a successful competition. We're going to talk about how some of the important bits that frankly we didn't even think about going in, and that is what happens when you have a competition and you generate a tremendous surge of interest by the development community and the civil engineering community to adopt LID and to utilize it in projects, and you don't have the infrastructure in place to permit or to effectively get those projects on the ground. So there are some key things we'd like to share in that area. And toward the end, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the resources that are available to you, and I think you'll be surprised to find that there are some very good ones. We're also, let me just say, Ross and Seth and I are going to try to make this as interactive as we can and try to make it as conversational as we can. So you'll hear them jumping in from time to time, and I will try to, guys, I will try to leave a little airspace for you as we get into some of these specifics. So we're going to focus on the Houston Land Water Sustainability Competition, but I've asked Ross to also insert, as we get a little further on, his experiences in another competition that was actually held here in Texas with the Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority. That's a very specific, frankly, quite a bit more specific goals than our competition did, and it was held slightly differently, but it also offers, in general, it followed the Houston model, and it also offers some insights that may be beneficial to you, so we'll cover both of those. In the Houston Land Water Sustainability Forum's design competition, it is probably, maybe to give you some insight into how this competition came about, it'd be important to know that the forum, as Sue alluded to, was formed in 2007. This was our mission statement you see on the slide. It was really an attempt to understand what the changes that we were seeing coming down the pike toward us with respect to green infrastructure and stormwater rulemakings and all those sorts of things, as well as to understand how we might use those tools in dealing with our specific issues in Houston. As you can imagine, if you've watched the news over the last decade, you know we flood quite a bit. So flooding is the #1 stormwater issue in Houston and always has been. We don't have a tremendous amount of regulatory impetus at this moment, but that too is coming, and we thought we should find out what and how these things would affect us. I kind of want to just take a moment and let you know the kinds of organizations that came together in this collaborative group that we call the Houston Land Water Sustainability Forum. This was meant to bring all the players who have whose economic futures ride on the ability to develop our community. And as you know, as everybody I suspect knows, in the dictionary next to the words urban sprawl, there is a photograph of Houston there. So our development has not always been done particularly well, but the part of the competition, part of the process of bringing this group together was to try to figure out how we could do it better. And in doing so, we brought together organizations who were represented by their leadership on the steering committee of the forum. Groups like the U.S. Green Building Council, local chapter, and in fact local chapters of all these organizations, American Society of Civil Engineers, the Houston Council of Engineering Companies, the Harris County Public Infrastructure Department in their Planning and Operations group, as well as several other groups, City of Houston's Public Works and Engineering Department, as well as several of the sub-departments, the Biopreservation Association, sort of our leading environmental group in Houston, the Energy Corridor District, the American Society of Landscape Architects, the Associated General Contractors of America, the local chapter of the International Erosion Control Association, the Houston Galveston Area Council, which is our regional planning organization, the American Institute of Architects, the Harris County Flood Control District, the Texas Department of Transportation's local group, and a variety of other smaller organizations came together to bring this stuff to fruition. The things that actually drove us toward the idea of a competition were the fact that for the city and for the county and for the surrounding cities and counties in the Houston metropolitan area, the cost of keeping up with traditional development is rapidly becoming an overwhelming burden. We had to find new ways to deal with these problems and look for new ways to reduce the costs of dealing with them. Developers were also obviously dealing with additional costs to meet new regulatory constraints. On the other hand, while this green infrastructure, low-impact development idea was quite well utilized in many parts of the country, it's something that there was really no examples of in the Houston area to speak of. And there was a lot of fear. It wouldn't work here. There was lots of fear about, how can I possibly jump on this bandwagon? I've never done it before. So at the bottom line, the forum recognized that change was inevitable, that we were going to have to move in these directions, and that we had two choices. We could, as a group of folks interested in the development of Houston, we could essentially wait until it was driven down our throats, or we could assume a leadership role, and that was the far better alternative.
I think one point there, Bob, that's important is that fear was not just with the owners, it was also with the engineers and the landscape architects. Basically, neither party was willing or comfortable pushing forward without having a better understanding of how LID would work in Houston. That's
exactly right. Exactly right. And Ross, and Seth, I know you hear from folks all over the country. Do you think our experience in Houston in that regard was unique?
I think it's pretty standard. I think that in most places there's an enlightened few who are comfortable, but the majority are always a little bit wary.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. There's a few champions that jump out front, and I think that's what's really unique about that situation, and it's really part of the success that's behind that effort.
Yeah. Okay, so why would we choose to do this lid design competition? I think that's a really good question, because there's a ton of ways to try to accelerate, as we were doing with the competition, the adoption and adaptation and the widespread implementation of LID. But we really came to the idea of doing the competition based on the fact that we had been doing educational sessions for a couple of years at the point of planning the competition. It was done on the basis of teaching people about low-impact development, green infrastructure. We brought in experts. We did lots of good stuff, and more and more people were interested. But the idea that you could, in a series of educational sessions or workshops over any period of time, actually convince an engineer to pitch a methodology that he or she had never actually done in a project, particularly in the economic times. We're talking about 2009 at this point, and in 2009, as everybody knows, there weren't a lot of developers out there ready to do anything. So if a civil engineer had the opportunity to sit across the table from someone who is ready to do a project, and he or she believes that low-impact development would be the right approach for this project, what are the odds that he or she is actually going to pitch that if they've never done it? The first question from the developer is likely to be, well, that sounds kind of interesting, but where have you done this before? How does it work? And the answer is obvious at that point, and it becomes, I think, very much a chicken or the egg sort of thing. We wanted to try to resolve that by giving people an opportunity to learn and decide for themselves to some extent about the future of lid in our community by actually doing a project. And since we couldn't produce developers to give them real projects, we thought the competition would be a good way to get there. Other things that you have to, other obstacles we felt like we had to deal with was the fact that most people in the Houston area at that time felt that anything that's green costs more. In 2009, LEED green buildings were still probably costing a little more than traditional development. I think those costs have come down even here now, but the idea that green costs more than regular development or regular construction was prevalent here. The other issue that we had to deal with respect to low-impact development and the adoption of it in our marketplace is that we really don't have the same sort of regulatory drivers that the folks, for instance, in the Chesapeake Bay or Puget Sound areas or many other areas of the country have to deal with. So it had to be acceptable for some other set of reasons. And the competition was about exploring another thing that the competition was about was exploring what those potential drivers might be.
I think this segues into the next piece, that if you've got an idea for a good competition and you think that this competition can have a major impact, the real challenge is you need to get people to compete in it. And what happens here is that you're basically asking for engineers to put their own time or their company's time forward to design a project they're not being paid for, with the opportunity for them to learn, to convince stakeholders, and so on. But without the competitors, there is no competition, and without a lot of competitors, there's no competition, and you don't let the good ideas rise to the top. So from an industry perspective, there was a real question when this first came out was, should we go ahead and compete in this competition? And for me and firms like my firm, the real question was, can we afford not to? We all knew that low-impact development and green infrastructure was coming down the pipeline, and the real question was, kind of like Bob said before, was do you want to be a leader or do you want to be a follower? And so I think on the engineering side, a lot of firms basically saw this as a great marketing opportunity, a chance to display their skills, their innovation to potential clients, to the influential leaders, whether they be city politicians or county leaders. But the big thing here was I think everybody who participated really had a desire to be recognized in the community as the leader in sustainable design, seeing that this will eventually become a big market for their business. Another key thing I think that goes back to this was that this is really a great opportunity for engineers to push the envelope of innovation. I think we're oftentimes a little bit scared perhaps on a real project where we're liable or where we have more responsibilities to push to that next level. But in the design competition, you're more free to explore those innovative ideas, and it allows our staff to put the best ideas forward and to really try and make big advancements, not just small advancements. So in the end, I think in terms of competing, it came down to how can you afford not to compete, and that kind of pressure inside the community ended up driving tons, and we'll talk later, of firms to compete as part of this competition. So moving into kind of having the why we did the competition and why we'd want to have people compete, we launched the Low Impact Development Design Competition in Houston, and this started off centered around 3 different challenges. One of the things that we tried to do with this was to make sure that the design challenges we put out there represented a lot of the typical development types in Houston. We tried to capture as much of development as we could so that someone couldn't say, oh, well, that worked on a roadway, but that wouldn't work on a subdivision, or that worked out in the sprawl of Houston, but it wouldn't work downtown. And so what you see here is the 3 categories that we put forth, which was a green roadway category that dealt with a Harris County road that they wanted to expand from 2 to 4 lanes. It was a mix of industrial development, but was really an opportunity where the county has to build or reconstruct hundreds of miles of road over and over and over again, and they're looking for cheaper ways to do it, and they're looking for more environmentally friendly ways to do it. So the county was happy to come forward and to offer up this real project that they wanted to construct and they wanted to complete soon to see if the engineering community could develop a better solution for developing county roadways.
You know, we had as you noticed, in fact, I wish we could blow that picture up for you. That's a real garden spot of Houston, right there. It's a very flat, completely flat, as virtually all of these sites were. The situation, and right through the middle of the refineries, it was not one of the real garden spots of Houston. In terms of the suburban residential development, we went after a developer who would provide a property that already had, and ideally already would have, a traditional design done for it. We knew what the standard county road would look like, the county in terms of the standard county roadway section for the Green Roadway Challenge. So we had an ideal comparative opportunity there. In the suburban residential, we'd hoped for the same thing. Initially, the developer, Misher Investments, who provided this property to us, offered us a property up in the northern segment of our city, which is the only area and represents only 4 or 5% of our area in terms of our geography in the Houston area, that does actually have infiltratable soils, at least in some places. They thought it would be a perfect place for us to demonstrate low-impact development, and we said, you know, that's really nice. We appreciate that. However, we really want this to be something that will provide transferable design ideas, and those ideas that come from that property will certainly not be transferable to other places where development takes place in Houston. So they gave us a 640-acre section of a former rice paddy out on the west side of town that was not only in non-infiltratable soils, but the entire property had been lined with clay to hold water back when it was a working rice farm. But they did have an existing development, which is what you see here, the existing traditional layout that was provided. The urban redevelopment project was quite a bit, was very interesting. This is the little white spot you see in the middle of the orange area was at that time the proposed new stadium for our professional soccer team here in Houston. By the way, winners of the championship many times over the last 4, 5, 6 years, and it is but it is essentially an economic wasteland on the opposite side of the primary north-south freeway in Houston, near, adjacent to this downtown city of Houston. The project was a 6-block promenade, 24/7, 365 days a year, kind of live venue for pedestrians only that would support the activities of the new stadium. So these were all pretty cool projects. They all did, as Ross pointed out, represent or come from owners who had real needs to get these projects developed, who were interested in what might come out of the results of the competition. There was no direct connection between winning or placing in the competition and actually getting the work, but I can tell you in the end that's pretty much how it's working out. And it was a pretty good representative group of projects for the Houston area, and we recommend that highly. So the participant demographics, there were 22 teams submitted. We actually would have had quite a few more teams submit for the urban redevelopment category, design challenge category, had it not been for the fact that about a week before we opened for accepting entries to the competition, there was a front page article in the newspaper on Sunday morning that said that the stadium was not going to be built on that site, that in fact some other developers had proposed an alternative location, and it was highly likely that the project would go to the new site. As it turned out, so 4 teams submitted anyway for that what was at the time believed probably not going to be a development that happened, at least not on that site. and they were rewarded for their perseverance. However, once the city made the decision to go ahead and put it on the original site, I can tell you that the two finalists in that particular design challenge are battling it out for the real work as we speak. But we had 42 firms involved. We did publicize the competition nationally. We thought it would be good to get ideas from other states and other places where lid had already been involved, already been used a lot. However, we wanted to make sure that the true benefit accrued to the Houston area, so we insisted that all teams that were from out of state have at least one Houston-based design professional of any one of the three categories that were required, i.e. civil engineers, landscape architects, and architects.
I think one important part about the participants as well, that these were teams that probably varied between 5 and 20 people in size, and oftentimes comprised up to 5 or 6 firms working together. I think actually my firm AECOM was the only firm who competed in this competition without a teaming partner. But for the most part, people were able to pull together different disciplines into the team, to pull together different ideas, and to really create teams of multidisciplinary specialists who would end up collaborating on this project and then in the future collaborating on other projects. So that teaming component was a big piece of it.
Yeah, that was one of the key goals in the competition, as a matter of fact, was to ensure that we could get some teams working together, get interdisciplinary teams working together on the competition. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But just to kind of summarize before we start breaking it down, to summarize some of the results and some of the impact of the competition, first of all, I can tell you that all 22 teams came up with the same results, basically, i.e. that low-impact development green infrastructure did produce substantial reductions in runoff. The improved stormwater quality was a given. I think that it was almost not even required to talk a lot about that. But that information is very available. The thing that surprised most people was the significant cost savings when comparing the lid designs that came out of the competition with the traditional development methods that would have been used otherwise. All teams were required to provide that sort of documentation, and as I said before, all 22 came away with the same results.
On average, it's about 10% less lower cost
on the roadway project. On some of the I think the competition results on the residential was actually quite a bit higher than that, maybe 30% in terms of an average. So the bottom line is that we came away with a huge boom in lid projects of all sizes and types. One of the largest low-impact development projects going on anywhere in the world at the moment is happening right here in Houston, as well as several other very large projects and a lot of smaller projects and a lot of little projects. But there are literally hundreds in the construction, design, development, permitting process as we speak. Some have been finished.
I think also, before you go on, Bob, one important thing here was that you came out of it with these design teams feeling like they could sell LID. And that's kind of what spurred, I think, a lot of the follow-up development, was people who felt comfortable and confident to take their ideas to different clients and to help push that through. So that is a big training and confidence-boosting thing for the engineering community.
Absolutely, and when all of the civil engineers involved in the competition heard their peers and their competitors at the front of on the stage at the front of the room at the finals event proselytizing for low-impact development, they realized they weren't the only ones that had found these things out, and I think you're right. I mean, I think it gave everybody a huge boost in confidence. Subsequently to this competition, I can tell you there are a number of firms in the Houston area who have completely retooled their business to focus on low-impact development projects almost exclusively. So it's had a huge impact, and we'd be happy to share any more of that information as we go. So lessons learned. I think one of the key things that we figured out was that the peer pressure was really important. As Ross mentioned earlier, could we afford not to compete? We had local government involved in a design competition by virtue of the fact of providing, City of Houston provided the redevelopment project, Harris County provided the roadway project, and both of those agencies are part of the forum. So when developers or civil engineers came into their offices during the time period that the competition entries were being accepted, I'm pretty confident that the folks in the city and county offices were saying, by the way, are you guys going to be competing in the competition? And if they got a quizzical look or a no, I'm positive that in many cases they were the civil engineers or the developer involved were told in fairly certain terms that the city and the county, or the county, whoever was speaking, was very interested in the outcome of this and really wanted to see everybody involved in the design community.
Well,
so that had
a two-way street there. Is it worked the other way, that after the competition was finished and the city and county sat in the finals event, taking it all in, they basically realized that, look, this works. If we're going to try and be an impediment or slow down this change, people are going to call us out because we now have this competition. We have all these results that basically dispel the myth and make it so it's possible. So, there's also peer pressure on the local government to quickly adapt to meet the changing paradigm.
That is definitely true, and we'll hear more about how that personified itself a little later. I think one of the other things that we were pleasantly surprised about is, while it was a goal of the competition to get integrated design teams working together, and that's primarily because in 2009, even though Houston was the number 3 marketplace for LEED green projects, it was a marketplace where the vast majority of those LEED green buildings sites could have been the Walmart down the street. They were developed with maybe some drip irrigation and some native plants, but outside of that, the management of stormwater and things like low impact development were just really not considered. And we thought that was a missed opportunity. It was missed primarily because most of the civil engineering community was not participating in that collaborative discussion that comes at the beginning of a LEED project. And what we found out was integrated design teams that worked together in the competition or that competed against each other are now working together on a regular project by project basis, and that was a critical outcome. As I said before, the economics favor lid design. That was an obvious lesson learned, and that I think most of the design community came away from the competition recognizing that lid was a superior design approach, even when water quality, as it was in our case, was a secondary goal, and that was pretty powerful.
That's an important point there. When Bob said in the beginning, we're talking about how to adopt and adapt low-impact development, and in Houston the case was that we actually took traditional low-impact development practices and adapted them to be able to serve as flood control features and to be able to accommodate the 11-inch, 13-inch rainstorms that Houston gets. So the competition was also that way to adapt low-impact development to the local conditions and make it most appropriate, which makes it all the more marketable in these areas.
Good point, Seth. Just for those of you who are thinking about the economics, and I have helped or sat in with and advised a variety of communities around the country about doing their own competitions along the way. Inevitably, there's the idea comes, or the thought about what is this going to cost comes up. I want you to know that we didn't actually spend any money on this competition. We brought in more money than the expenses for it. We accomplished this by raising the cash contributions for the prizes, and we offered $15,000 prizes for each of the 3 design challenge categories. We wanted a number that was interesting and potentially enticing to the potential participants. And so we allowed the developer who provided us with his property for the residential design challenge to provide the $15,000 prize for that that particular design challenge. The local AIA chapter, who was most interested in the urban redevelopment project, put up a $15,000 prize for that category, and the local ASCE chapter put up a $15,000 prize for the roadway project because that was the one they were most interested in. And then our leading local environmental organization put up an underwriting donation of $7,500 to help underwrite the finals event. We sold tickets, $50 a seat or $1,000 a table for the finals event, and we charged $250 per entry for the entry fees. And in total, we raised about $75,000. By virtue of all that, we spent about $65,000 and had $10,000 left later to pay for more workshops. So it was not something where you need to go out and have $100,000 or $200,000 to work with to make this happen. You really just need some money to float you during the period before the finals event. And so, Ross, you want to tell us a little bit about the Austin Design Challenge with the Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority?
Sure. This was a design challenge that took place just in the past 6 months. And it was run by the Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority, who is kind of the local actor for the Texas Department of Transportation. And they took this and basically did a very similar approach to the Houston model, but tailored it to their area of interest, which of course was large-scale regional transportation projects. And so they took this design challenge concept and said, how can we start to think about better ways of constructing, operating, and maintaining future transportation projects that are the most environmentally friendly? And so they took it and focused it on one exact type of development. But what they did was that interesting was that they basically said, we want to develop kind of a toolbox of things that we should be considering in the future. What does the roadway of the future look like? And we want to know about it now so that we can start planning for it and incorporate it in the future. So this challenge had less to do with impacting, the general public at large or talking with elected officials or other things, but more towards trying to change the approach of a transportation agency or authority into how they respond to projects and how they incorporate sustainable stormwater management and other features. So in this challenge, basically, they similarly had two categories. One was an interchange, the Oak Hill Expressway, and one was kind of a beltway called the Menchaca Expressway. And so they invited teams to participate in these two categories. Each had their own particular issues. Of primary importance was the fact that these two projects, the CTRMA has been trying to build for a long time, but due to environmental issues, for example, the Menchaca Expressway was on top of the Edwards Aquifer, which is one of the most environmentally sensitive zones in all of Texas. There's been years and years of opposition environmentally from communities of pushing these projects forward, and so they thought this was a great example to say, oh, how can we figure out, is there a way that would make this project more environmentally appropriate that could allow us to build this key critical transportation corridor? So, like I said, this basically looked at trying to find and develop what is the new transportation paradigm. And this looked at stormwater management, environmental issues, but it also looked at energy efficiency, renewable materials. So in that sense, it was a little bit broader in scope in that it was not just about low-impact development, but definitely low-impact development was a large piece of this competition. So overall, what we saw was a slightly smaller turnout than the Houston competition, I think partially because it was more focused on a certain type of engineering. So we had 8 entrants in the Menchaca Expressway category, 2 entrants in the Oak Hill Expressway category, and we also had several student teams who competed in a separate student category as well. And we ended up doing a finals event where we had all these teams presenting to a group of celebrity judges and over 100 people in attendance. And it was a very similar process to the Houston competition. What we found throughout this whole thing was, once again, there are lots of innovative ideas out there, lots of ideas that can lower the cost of transportation development. But I think most importantly was that we found a lot of innovative ways to protect water quality through innovative design and BMP development. And those are things that I think, if you're working on a transportation project, you'll grab the standard for water quality design and throw it into your project. And this competition said, let's try and do better, let's do more, let's do it at a lower cost with higher efficiency. And a lot of great ideas were developed by this. And so out of this, basically, the CTRMA has stated that they're going to explore and build on all of the reasonable and feasible ideas so that they can try and implement them in future projects. So this is the first step for the Mobility Authority to basically to become more environmentally friendly. And so that's kind of an overview of that challenge. I think we're now going to step into a session of questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was great. And we are going to give our speakers a chance to answer some questions from the audience. But before we do that, we have a couple of quick poll questions for you to answer. Once you answer, you'll be able to view the results of the poll immediately. And these results will refresh with the most updated result as more people answer. You should now see the first poll question on your screen, which asks you to identify who you work for. And you have 6 options: state and federal government, local government, tribal entity, watershed group, university, and other. And while we're waiting, I would like to direct your attention to the resource list, which is under the Downloads tab of your console. We have provided a background document on the Green Streets, Green Jobs, Green Towns, aka G3 partnership, as well as links and information on low impact development and the low impact development design competition. The G3 partnership background document also provides the contact information for the G3 team here at EPA Region 3 in the Watershed Protection Division. If you have any questions regarding the G3 partnership, the Academy, or the G3 Digest, please feel free to contact any one of us. And I believe now we have the answers to the poll question regarding who are you working with. We have, the numbers changed. We have 37% working for state or federal government, 35% are with local government, 1% with tribal entity, 3% with watershed group, 1% with the university sector, and 22% are in the other category. And now you can see poll question number 2, which is how many people are participating in the webcast today at your location. Please click the radio button that best describes how many people are watching from your location. You have 5 options, including just me, 2 to 5 people, 6 to 10 people, 10 to 20, and more than 20. Hopefully you can see that poll now. And while we're waiting for the results, I would like to take a brief commercial break and talk about a little bit about the G3 partnership, which sponsors a number of informational and training opportunities in addition to this webcast series. The first is we've mentioned the G3 Digest, and I encourage you all to sign up for that. It's a bi-weekly newsletter focusing on current events in green infrastructure, green streets, green jobs, and low-impact development. We've included a copy of the current and past G3 Digest under the Downloads tab on the resource page. And please feel free to contact one of the G3 team members to sign up for that. In the spring, we will be hosting our second annual G3 Forum in the Baltimore and Washington area. You will learn more about that as we finalize our plans, and notices will appear in the G3 digest as well. So please stay tuned and feel free to contact one of our team members to get more information about that. So I think we have our poll results. And let's see, how many people are participating at your location? Just Me gets a high 75%. 22% have indicated that there are 2 to 5 people at their location, 3% 6 to 10 people, and I think that's it. So if you haven't submitted your questions, please do so now. And it seems like some people were not able to see the poll questions, so I hope that's been resolved. But while we're waiting, let's go ahead and ask questions of the speakers. One question was, what is the rationale for having an architect be required to be on the team?
Well, I'll take that one. And in fact, I should have been specific. An architect was not required on the Green Roadway Challenge because there was no interaction with buildings in that challenge. However, it was important in the context of the other 2 challenges. Number one, in the residential challenge, certain numbers of certain lot counts had to be hit. There had to be a number of decisions made in the project with respect to the homes themselves. While they were not, or the design of those homes was not important to the competition, a variety of other factors relative to the location of homes and, as I said before, lots and those sorts of things were a part of the considerations because we did have to meet the developer's program, what the developer wanted to get out of that property. As it related to the redevelopment project, it was most critical there in terms of massings of buildings. These were, going to be new structures that were everything from, entertainment facilities and restaurants to multi-use facilities and residential. So the architect was important, and quite frankly, we wanted the architects involved as much as anything else to establish those relationships and those working collaborative conversations with respect to how to move forward on the project.
Hey, Bob, this is Seth. I wanted to clarify, too. Did that requirement include landscape architects as well?
Yes. All teams were required to have at least one design professional in each of those 3 categories, landscape architect, architect, and civil engineer. Many of the teams had planners. Many of the teams had in fact, some of the residential teams going after the residential design challenge had home builders, and all of them, many of the teams had a variety of different professionals of all different kinds. It was actually pretty incredible.
Okay, thanks, Bob. And we have a few more questions. Feel free to continue to submit your questions. We have someone who's curious about where the largest low-impact development project is located in Houston.
Ross, I'm gonna describe the project, but I can't name it.
Yes.
Well, why don't you? In fact, I'll let you describe it because you probably don't have any problem naming it.
Well, I probably shouldn't either, but you can go ahead and describe it.
I'm sorry. I'm under a non-disclosure on that particular project, but I will tell you this is the world's largest, going to be the world's largest corporate headquarters, and one of the world's largest corporate headquarters, and their intent is for it to be the single most sustainable corporate world headquarters anywhere on the planet. And it's being built here in Houston.
Okay, thank you.
I should tell you that the name and the people involved have been all over the newspaper, but my non-disclosure still doesn't allow me to say that.
Okay, no problem. We won't hold that against you. Okay, we have a question from California, I believe. Are the LID principles incorporated into the construction general permit in the state of Texas?
The answer to that is not yet. There is a new general permit draft in play now. It will incorporate a bit more in that regard, but as you know, the current general permit by the EPA, or that's been released by the EPA, has added those kinds of things, but it's not yet required that the state of Texas use that format.
And that was one of the important things about trying to find other reasons to do low-impact development, was there was not a regulatory driver for it yet, but in our case, the cost piece of having major cost savings for using LID provided the driver for further adoption and adaptation of LID.
Okay, great. Thanks for your questions, folks. I'll take one more question. How did you advertise and promote the design challenge?
In a variety of different ways. Obviously, if you stop and think about the fact that we had, as members of the steering committee of the forum, representatives and leaders from all of the major design professional organizations, or most of the major design professional organizations in our area, we were able to piggyback on their communications to their members. That was helpful. We also found a number of websites all over the country and all over the world that advertise design competitions, primarily the more conceptual type architectural competitions. But we submitted to all of those sources. We submitted to all of the magazines in the stormwater and engineering and architecture and landscape architecture communities, as well as their websites. It was a pretty broad blanket that we cast.
And I can't stress how important that is. I think the worst nightmare for any design competition is to not have enough entrants, because then you don't have any momentum, you don't have any critical mass to see change through. So the advertising piece is very important.
Okay, great. We're going to continue on with our speakers, but feel free to continue to submit your questions. We will have time a little bit later to answer some more. So next up.
Okay. So we're going to try to break down now some of the key elements of the competition that turned out to be important to us in terms of the results that we achieved. But we are running a little slow, so I'm going to try to speed this up a tad without talking too quickly. I think most importantly, the collaborative process was important. It was important to have all of those players at the table, and I would recommend highly, even if you don't have a Houston Land Water Sustainability Forum type organization in your community, you either form one or at least you bring those people that represent those organizations into the conversation about the competition. Because that will be important to generating entrants. It's important, I think, to this kind of competition, if we're talking about designing a real project using real data that's provided by the owner, just like any design professional would be provided by any developer. If you're talking about trying to come out with a real design and not just a conceptual design, it means there are a whole lot of moving parts. And if you make your goals overly broad, you will have a hard time generating entrants. I think one of the reasons that the CTMRA competition, for instance, only had relatively small numbers. They had a pretty large laundry list of goals, and it was necessary in the nature of their competition that they do that. But I think maybe that provides an example of one of the reasons, if you don't have that narrow of a focus as they did, that it might be better to not have such a broad set of goals. Also, and we'll talk more about this later, but it is important that all of the key component agencies in the city have some skin in the game, and as I mentioned before, they all provided something as it related to the design competition, whether it was property or funding or something along the way. And as I said before, having real projects that are typical of the design of your community or the development of your community is important. Again, I think we've covered all these topics, so I'm not going to spend much time on this slide. But bringing together people who were involved in the competition as a result of enlightened self-interest, rather than purely as an environmental exercise, I think was important. We felt the competition or the forum was best served as being seen as an industry collaborative rather than an environmental group. And I think that, again, that brought in people who wanted to be leaders as a result of what it might do for them, quite frankly. And that's not, there's nothing wrong with that. What that does, I think, is keep their interest in moving forward. And, oh, by the way, some really wonderful things are going to happen for the environment if we make this happen.
I think it's also key in there that you've got the developers, the engineers, and the permitters all talking and collaborating and trying to figure it out what it is between those three groups that might make it hard to do an LID project. And so just that collaboration of trying to develop the competition together, trying to make it the most impactful competition, I think went a long way towards kind of improving relationships between those people and therefore easing the ultimate implementation of LID.
Yes, absolutely. And I also want to point out that this does not have to be a long, drawn-out, year and a half, 2-year process. We actually start from the very first discussion of doing a design competition to launch was 4 months. I've been told subsequent to this that that's not possible, but I can assure you that we did a lot of just-in-time sort of decision-making along the way. But it can be done, and I'm not suggesting that it's the best way. But it worked very well for us. So I caution people that are considering doing this not to overthink it too much. Hopefully we can provide you with a roadmap to the way we did it, and just adapt it for your own purposes and move forward. Just get it going. Folks' goals, I said before, was important. We had to promote integrated design teams. We wanted to use real properties with challenging conditions, not easy conditions, because we wanted to be able to enable that knowledge transfer that comes from designing properties that other people are going to be designing properties just like tomorrow. We wanted to, in our community, again, the primary goal and the primary driver here with respect to stormwater management has to do with runoff reduction and with flooding. So we insisted that the teams come up with a hydrograph for their post-development condition that was below the pre-developed condition at 5, 10, and 100 your events. Seemingly a tough thing to do. Actually, most of them, all of them, beat those numbers, and they did so by a very wide margin. And they had to explain the model that they used and how they achieved that, and that had to be credible for the judges to consider it. And we, again, wanted to focus, and I think it's good for any community, quite frankly, to focus on the cost aspects, because we all know that new technologies only get developed and only get accepted in the marketplace when they are better and cheaper. So we want markets to drive. We wanted in our marketplace. We wanted the market to drive the adoption of LID rather than regulations, and it's worked out very well. As I said before, we wanted all the key players to have some skin in the game. It worked out quite well, and I think we've already talked about this probably as much as need be. Let's talk about the design challenge selection. Again, we wanted the contestants to have all of the same sort of information they would have gotten from an owner in a real project. So they got surveys and topo maps, and they got outfall information and project and program goals that the developer was interested in achieving on the project. That made this a very, very real competition, not a conceptual competition at all.
It's also important here that everybody has access to the same starting information, because when you're doing a side-by-side comparison of projects, if someone assumes there's no outfall capacity and you have to put a new outfall in, that's going to raise the cost and hurt your project compared to someone else's. So actually what Bob and the forum did was they established a Google group system that allowed questions to be asked and relayed to all participants so that everybody had the same information and was making the same decisions to allow for that apples-to-apples comparison of each project.
Yeah, there are a ton of little bitty nuts and bolts kinds of things that we're not going to have time to get to today, but they're certainly available out there, and we're certainly available to share any of that with you that you're interested in. But one of the things that we did do was set up a Google group. We publicized that to all of the entrants once they had made their entries, and anytime there was a question about any of the specifics about the rules or the program or the specifics on any of the given design challenges, people were encouraged to submit their questions to the Google group, and one of the forum steering committee folks or subcommittee, design competition subcommittee folks would answer that so that everyone could see the answers. And that is important. You've got to keep it a level playing field to the extent you possibly can. I think we've already covered pretty much all of this stuff. The design challenge categories, again, we wanted to try to mimic local development patterns as best we could. So let's talk about how the competition actually proceeded. We had the key data. We had the submittal criteria, and it required that they submit the financial comparison information, their hydrograph information, their design itself, and a variety of other things that you can find in our white paper or on the actual program itself on the forum's website, so I won't bore you with all that. But I will tell you that we did learn a lesson in this, a lot of lessons, but one of the key ones was With respect to the financial data, we did not require that information to be formatted identically by all competitors, and we wished we would have. As you can see when you read our white paper, we're kind of all over the board in terms of how we share with readers of that white paper how that economic information actually came back. If you go back through and read every single one of the submittals, you can see for yourself, but in terms of everybody using the same terms, providing the same information so that comparisons could be made or that statistics could be compiled, we failed to do that, and it was a big mistake. Doing it again, we would make sure that all data, all important data that we wanted to use later, statistically or in any other fashion, was formatted identically. Judging, it was a two-edged sword. We wanted to educate and influence the judges as much as we wanted to educate and influence the entrants in this competition. So we had a two-stage judging process, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Scoring, we wanted to weight the scores so that we ensured that technical merit was the highest weighted component of the scoring. We wanted to use a high-profile finals event that would attract a lot of attention, would hopefully be a very exciting program. We also, as we said before, in terms of the submittal criteria, made each of the entrants provide those design professionals that were required. We required submittals in an electronic format. We did not take paper submittals of any kind. We did require 2 presentation boards from each team that submitted, because we wanted to make sure that even those folks that didn't make the finals would have the opportunity to have their 2 boards that represented their design on display at the finals event. It also made for some pretty cool, as I said here, eye candy for all of those people who came to the finals event. We had a standard format for the submittal, and we actually used a PowerPoint format because it was the simplest and easiest way that we could think of to get the information not only turned in, but also when we're doing the judging, to be able to flip through every one of the designs. Judging, as I said before, we had a 2-stage competition. We used in both stages, we wanted very influential judges who would be attractive to the potential participants when the judges' names were made public. The expert judges who handled stage 1 was a group of 6 folks, split half and half between people with a very deep sustainability background and 3 with very deep traditional development backgrounds. And we had the head of Harris County's public infrastructure department. We had a gentleman who led one of the largest and most significant hydrology firms, or hydrology-focused engineering firms in town. We had a senior vice president for one of the biggest home builders in the country involved in the judging, and those 3 were our traditional guys. Sustainability folks, we had Larry Kaufman, who was the original innovator of low-impact development. We had a very well-respected landscape architect and architect from our region, who are both leaders in the sustainability movement in our part of the country. The finals jury panel was we hoped would be all developers. We ended up with a predominance of developers and then a number of celebrity, political and other type celebrity judges. We wanted to make the finals event a spectacle, and we wanted folks to be thinking that we're potentially going to compete in the competition. We wanted them to think about what it might be like for them to have the opportunity to stand up in front of 15 or 20 developers and or local celebrities, influencers in a big way, and present their design. As it turned out, as I said before, we had predominance of developers. We had a 20-person finals judging panel, and in both cases, both judges and jury, post-competition, reflected on it and told us that they had been influenced themselves. They had not even really considered low-impact development, or they had not really understood that it would work here, or they had not really understood just how powerful it could be. And that was an important component of the success long-term of this competition. Scoring. We did, as I said before, we wanted to weight the final scores to the technical component as opposed to the pretty component, and although both were important, so we gave the expert judging panel an 80% weight. The total final score for for all the finalists came. The jury panel provided 20% of the weight. That left enough room to advance the best communicators and marketers of lid concepts, which was important. And we used a very simple rate at 1, 2, 3 because there were typically three finals teams in each category. Going back to the expert judges, we required quite a lot out of them. We actually sent them all 22 electronic submittals about a month before or I guess 3-4 weeks, 3-4 weeks before they met to make their decisions. Asked them to review those submittals and come to the judging session with an idea of what they thought their 1, 2, 3s were. Let's see.
And finally, I think, in terms of the finals event, like Bob said, it was about making a spectacle. And we had at the finals event over 400 people. And I can honestly say I've never been to an engineering-related event that there was so much excitement in the air, so much energy. And what you'll see here is, these are some pictures from the finals event. Down in the lower left-hand corner, you can see this ballroom was jam-packed. The picture on the bottom right is our celebrity judges. The participants up top presenting and talking about their boards. This event was really a great cap to this competition, and it really allowed all the excitement from the competition to be put forward in the correct light. And this was really the jumping point for all the changes that occurred after that.
Okay, thank you all. That's a great presentation. I think lots of questions have come in, so we're running a little short on time, so I'll just pose a couple of questions to the speakers and then we'll move on. Some of the questions had to deal with resources and numbers, and I would refer those people to the websites, including the Houston Land and Water Sustainability Forum website. You'll find a lot of the answers there, including maybe some ideas on projects for your own competition. But let's see. One question here is, did you provide a standard unit cost table for economic evaluation? For instance, unit cost for construction and land.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's one of the lessons we learned. We did not ask for the information in a standard table format. Would do that differently next time, obviously. But as it related to the cost of land, that specific issue was not a factor in this particular competition. They were provided with specific land on which to develop, so the cost of the land was not a factor.
Okay, great. And just quickly, have any of the Houston projects been built?
Yes, actually, none of them have been built yet. All 3 of them will be built. The City of Houston is moving forward on the Promenade project downtown. The developer of the residential property, who has for obvious reasons not done a lot of developing in the last couple of years, is anxious to get started on that project, and they have selected a winner or they have selected a team to do the project. It is one of the finals teams. And the roadway, that specific roadway has not been built. However, another roadway by the county has been built on this model in the northern half of the city.
Okay, great. I think that's all the time we have for questions. We will try to answer your questions offline. So next up.
Okay, well let me get rolling here. Competition follow-up. The competition goal was obviously to get a lot of low-impact development projects started in the Houston area, and we were able to accomplish that. It did require, however, some very specific things to try to make it happen here. I suspect that many of you live in places like we do, where the old code, existing codes, were not particularly amenable to low-impact development. They weren't completely not at all hospitable, but they were not amenable to making it happen on a quick basis. It was more on an exception type basis. But in the city of Houston, Harris County, we were able to, because of the impetus and the momentum that came out of the competition, to get the city and the county and all of the agencies that had played in the participation, or played in the forum and in the competition, into a room, a large conference room over a period of 3 days spread out during the summer of 2010, and develop a workaround, essentially a 25-page design guide for low-impact development projects that provided a collaborative permitting process, which would allow those projects to go through. They had to provide all of the key elements that were required, that a project following the code very strictly would require, but in a way that was amenable to low-impact development. And I really don't have time to go into that, but you'll find a copy of that design guide on the forum website.
I think the key thing there is that every city is going to have their own barriers, but to make sure that you figure out how best to use the momentum from the competition to target those barriers and try and quickly overcome them.
Yeah, exactly. And so I guess while it's, I think, probably hard to imagine that a city or a county, in our case Harris County, would or could come up in a very, very short period of time, over 4 or 5 months, a complete workaround to their standard design guide is probably hard to imagine. But because of the momentum and the power of what came out of the competition, it was actually quite, and the collaborative process that had been established from the very beginning, we were able to do it, and it was very cool. I think all this stuff is obvious, and I know we're running late, so I'm gonna skip through this. But you do have a lot of folks helping perpetuate the change by virtue of the momentum that comes out of this competition. Let me say that there is a lot of help available, and we've pointed to the forum website a couple of times, and I'm more than willing to talk to anyone who wants to call. My contact information is at the end of this, and I'll be happy to help you on a volunteer basis in any way I can. How about you other guys?
Definitely. I think we're all here to help, and I think anybody who has questions, feel free to email us, and we'll be happy to help out.
Seth?
Yeah, and that's actually, I wanted to take just a few minutes to focus on what WEF is trying to do to help out now, and also in the near future, because obviously there's a lot of interest. We've got close to 250 participants on this event, over 31. I guess there's 31 states on this call as well. So obviously there's a high amount of interest, and we understand why at WEF. So we want to be able to be a catalyst for great ideas such as this. Real quickly, the Water Environment Federation has been around for over 80 years, but most people may not associate stormwater with WEF based on the past, but we now see the importance of this in the future. And so we've also had a change in leadership recently. So when that happens, you kind of retool a little bit. And this is our new mission statement. And you can see I've highlighted the fact that we're really looking at innovation, and we see these competitions as being a very innovative approach, and so we're trying to do everything we can to support that. I'm going to skip through some of the information here just for the sake of time so we can address some questions. But for those who have any interest in getting involved with the stormwater program here at WEF, here's a bunch of information. The most important thing is just go to wef.org/stormwater. And here's a mission statement that our stormwater group put together, and that's coming from our members. And you can see that they are they've listed out topics and key terms such as hydrologic, functional watersheds, innovation, cost-effective management. We didn't do this. We didn't write this up thinking that we wanted to target LID, but this is what it is. This really ties in very well. So what are we doing right now with WEF to support the competitions? Well, I mean, the reason that we're doing this again is that we think it's a great way. These competitions are a great way to basically hold up a mirror to the development community, the engineering community, the architects community, to engage them positively and challenge them. And as we've heard from Bob, this is you can get great results doing that. And also, as somebody with a technical background and engineering background, I love solving problems and coming up with innovative solutions. But the way that stormwater traditionally has been done over the last 20, 30 years, there's a lot of following standards and kind of cookie-cutter approach. LID allows you to go outside, and these competitions really allow you to go outside the box and be creative. So that's another reason that we feel like this is a real innovative approach. So right now there's a number of competitions going on in EPA Region 3. We'll show a couple of those. But we're looking at, we're supporting a number of those, but we're also looking at doing what we can, because we have a national coverage in our network, to export that beyond Region 3. And also providing information to help ensure successful competitions. We're doing that by having a webcast series, and there'll be some information on that the next slide. We're also doing what we can to. We're looking at doing a meeting in the next year to bring competitors together here in the Washington D.C. area at our office here to just talk about a lot of the questions that have already come up and obviously more, because the devil's really in the details there. There's a lot of discussion about how it's important to be able to promote and get the word out to get a lot of excitement in the community. We've got local and regional networks with our organization that we would love to utilize to help all the competitions across the country really move forward in a strong way. So here's some information on 3 webcasts that have just been scheduled. We don't have anything set up on our website because this is so new, but you can go to wef.org/onlineeducation for more information. Just check that periodically, and eventually we'll have some information up on that. But basically we're doing, obviously we're running late because there's so much good information out there that Bob and others who've had experiences here that they can relay. And the real point is to be able to have a successful competition and be able to not only do that, but make that success a permanent success. And that's why, we're breaking this up into past, present, and future. That's the way that it's set up. So anyway, there's a lot more information that we can go into, and we will be going into. So keep your eyes open for that. More information about, we've got an upcoming stormwater symposium here in the Baltimore area in Region 3. And we will definitely be finding ways to highlight LID competitions in Region 3. So again, keep your eyes open on that. And here's just a listing of what's going on in Region 3 and in the Texas area as well. I mean, you've heard about a number of these, but just sharing this with all of you, so in case you haven't heard about this and you're interested to see what's going on. The point is, and the reason we've got that bullet point that says others at the bottom, because we're interested, are there others out there involved with this webcast right now that are thinking about moving forward? If so, let us know, and we want to do everything we can to support that.
Okay, so back to resources. Please check out these websites. There are plenty of resources out there, and as you've heard, Seth and Ross and I are very happy to be a resource as well. So with that, we're gonna wrap up. Say thank you very much to those who are listening, and I'll turn it back over to Sue.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much. It was great information. And for those questions that we were unable to answer, please feel free to contact the speakers directly. Their contact information is on this slide and is also included under the Downloads tab on your console. And if you would like to download and print out a certificate that you participated, please do so. The link is right there on your screen. And I think we have a survey that we'd like for you to participate in, so you should see that appearing in your screen window soon. And again, thank you again. We're interested in the survey. Let us know your thoughts, and we appreciate your feedback as we work to improve. So at this time, I'd like to conclude today's webcast. Thank you, Robert, Seth, and Ross for presenting. And of course, thanks to everyone who joined us. And I believe that ends our webcast for today.